I welcome everyone again to today's session at the EU Mental Health Week, really starting off our first session of the week at UP Zürich. Let me just begin to share my screen. Big thumbs up if you can see that. Fantastic. All right, welcome to this session. As I said, kicking off the European Mental Health Week, I'm really glad that we've gathered today to look at where it all starts, right? At the leadership, at the top, and what this means. Obviously, there's many aspects to mental health in leadership, but today I'm going to focus on a topic that's really close to my heart, and that's vulnerability in leadership, how it shows up, how the anxiety can really dominate so much of that. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. At the end of today's session, we'll have a little Q&A session. Hopefully we can pack that into the 30 minutes. And let's begin. Little introduction. Hopefully I'll get to hear from some of you at the Q&A, an introduction to myself, as of course some of you know me already, some not, in my different capacities. Of course, I'm part of the UP Zurich community. I am a conflict resolution and mediation advisor. I have my own practice called the Mencius Advisory in Zurich. And I've been in the business of managing conflict for 15 years. So that's really what I've been doing my whole career. I've been managing conflicts at different levels, at the level of diplomacy. So I was a diplomat with the Foreign Service before, to mediating international armed conflict. So conflict has been driving me and my interests in how to resolve it for many years. Today I do this again through my own advisory, through conflict coaching, through mediation, through trainings and well-being strategies. And through my work with traumatized populations, I got really interested in mental health and retrained as a counseling therapist specializing in trauma. So I do bring mental health awareness and practice to all my work. And that's a bit about me and why I'm talking to you about that junction between leadership and conflict and mental health today. Excellent. So we're all here because of vulnerability in leadership. Something kind of maybe grabbed you in that. I was wondering if anybody would like to share. You can keep your mics on or just share in the chat box below. But what comes to mind when you think of vulnerability in leadership? I'd love to hear, like, what your experiences are. What are people thinking of in this room?
My experience, and it's just a bit of an explanation. I'm an HR business partner for executives and C-level, and what I realize is a huge difference between those levels and mid-managers. Mid-managers are more close to the team. The larger the population is, the larger the scope of responsibility. I feel that there's a larger fear of being vulnerable. The exposure is larger, and therefore the impact is huge compared to middle management. I think related to your topic, I feel more comfortable guiding middle managers than I feel comfortable guiding executives and C-levels. They have to be so versatile, they have to be strategic, they are so visible. And still they want to do things right, but they also have the CHRO and the management team, which is also a political conflict with some eagle eyes looking on them. And I think that is quite a vulnerable position they're in to address these kind of topics.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Danielle, for sharing. Absolutely. I'm hearing like different parts of that, right? It really struck me is the visibility, how much people contact they have. You mentioned wanting to do things right and this fear. So I'm picking up some emotions there as well and some big words. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can say as much as I'm definitely in alignment with what Daniela just said. My few cents, because I've been doing a lot of research in terms of belonging and the sense of belonging, and what I realize in my research is that vulnerability about feeling and being like feeling permission to be authentic is exactly very challenging on the senior level. And then
Yeah.
but unfortunately, by not being authentic, this is what resonates to the whole organization. And that's how people are perceived, because the whole employee population below the top executives level will feel that lack of authenticity. And that's why, how can we create the space that leaders are allowed to step in the role in an authentic manner without being fearful about losing their credibility or professionalism. So that's why, actually, that was my reason for joining this session.
Yeah.
Aga, I can relate to that so much, because when I work with different C-levels in a certain organization, the departments that work well, the senior leaders can be more authentic.
Mm-hmm.
The departments that are not functioning well,
Mm-hmm.
where exactly belonging is a major topic, but can be also business purposes, business profit related, or external stakeholder related, those leaders are less capable of being authentic, because it is really about protecting their department on a political level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Aga, for sharing. And yep, so many cross-cutting needs I'm hearing, and different topics that intersect with what Danielle shared as well. I think, Aga, for me, you mentioned this word authenticity, and we'll see this play out as well, but it's something I hear so much of. So we'll just wrap up the slide, but really quick, I also want to welcome Karine really quickly, who joined a few minutes after we started. Karine, really welcome. So lovely to see you here. Excellent. So the different keywords I think that Aga and Danielle shared, really, I think we share so much of that when we think of vulnerability in leadership, and we think of being that strong person. As we said, how do we navigate those political conflicts? And I hear that so much from my clients, right? We hear more and more about well-being as essential to good work-life balance. How do we manage the stress around these decisions? And authenticity as a key to communication. So there's so much pressure from on top on the leaders themselves to be authentic, and what can this look like? So obviously a big caveat that this topic is so massive, we can really be here for many hours, and I see there's so much experience with all of you here, and I'll try to condense some of those topics in the little time we have today. So one can say that, from what we shared, we can see that a commonality in feeling this vulnerability is the fear of being or showing up as less than our perfect ideals, whatever that expectation is, right? And because of this fear, we end up being maybe indecisive, right? We're scared to take that next decision. We chase perfectionism, or interestingly, related to conflict, we either make poor decisions or we might avoid conflict altogether. Right. So this obviously is a terrible storm of factors for effective leadership. It's not at all what we're called to be. But in all of this, we tend to think that something bad is going to happen to us, right? When we're unmasked, when something is discovered. And this fear of something bad happening, this anxiety, what we call anxiety, then comes to dominate this feeling of vulnerability. So I like to, of course, also begin with saying that this anxiety is completely normal, right? It's part of the different emotions that contribute to this feeling of being vulnerable. Maybe we feel doubt or anxiety. I think a big one I hear from clients is often imposter syndrome, right? Which happens at the leadership level, in fact, at all levels. And not realizing that it's a really natural response, because we're introspective, because we try to self-improve. But because of that, and with comparison, we end up feeling this sense of we're not good enough at what we do. We're scared to be unmasked in our vulnerabilities. Our shortcomings will be visible to everybody. And so we see here that along with fear and anger and sadness and shame, vulnerability is very challenging at the leadership level. But I hope we'll also see that this vulnerability cannot just be tolerated, but also reflected on as doors of opportunity. And where could those doors lead? Possibly to greater empathy, engagement, and courage for us to grow as leaders. And I hope to show you that when we grow in those capacities as leaders, we also become better navigators and managers of conflict, right? Within workplaces, political conflict, what have you. Right. So all of us know anxiety and vulnerability doesn't feel good, so we don't tend to maybe address it as much as we can at the individual or workplace level and organizational level. But what happens, right, when we don't address this anxiety, we don't check it, we leave it unaddressed, it starts to impact our performance. Right? It manifests itself in different ways. When we're managing conflict, it tends to impact performance and psychological safety. So earlier we spoke about indecision, perfectionism, and conflict avoidance as some of the ways that it shows up in leadership. We spoke about imposter syndrome as well, this feeling of they better not see the real me or how I really feel like I should be responding, right? And that's where I want to get to the reactive versus the proactive. So all these responses are really reactive responses because our anxiety is unregulated and we feel like we constantly have to respond to a situation that will hopefully not go wrong, right? And we're constantly on this wrong footing of reacting versus being on the more effective footing of being proactive in our responses, right? So instead of constantly imagining the worst thing that could happen and reacting to it, we don't spend as much time because of our vulnerabilities calling ourselves towards proactive responses, especially in decision-making, especially in navigating conflict with our teams, with our colleagues, with our suppliers, with our stakeholders. So we really want to be the ones solving problems out there proactively, not the ones responding or just caught in the problems ourselves. And I often hear this from clients as well. I hear, how can I deal with this anxiety, this vulnerability, without taking too much of my mental space or have it destroy me when it's going on? And I also hear things like, how do I notice when a conflict I'm trying to resolve has gotten too much and out of my hands, and I might need some extra help for it? So there's lots of questions and insecurities that tend to come up. People are often really afraid of negative performance reviews, scared to ask for help, scared to be seen as anything but this perfect ideal. And what I want to say is these are, in fact, excellent questions. Well, the answers are obviously really tricky. They're excellent questions because they call us towards self-reflection as leaders. And I think, what Aga and Daniel was saying at the start, what can be done, this will keep coming up again, but this sense of self-reflection and creating space, giving permission together as a work culture for this space to exist is ultimately key. And I think where everything, all the solutions flow from. And I think when we have this space for self-reflection, the solutions also speak of the need for psychological safety at work. So we talked about giving permission to these spaces, but psychological safety at work becomes so important when tackling this vulnerability, because we're talking about the ability and the need to express our authentic selves without fear of negative consequences, right? So that's really, I think, the culture that we're trying to create here. And in fact, how we lead and how we act towards others, of course, gives them the permission to respond with the same attitudes and actions, thereby creating, of course, this workplace culture, this culture of safety. So if we don't allow ourselves to be humans and make mistakes, we don't allow others around us to feel safe to do so either. And guess what? That, together with the poor decision-making, that reactive response, the mishandled situations and ineffective communication, they create these precursors to conflict. They create the storm of factors that could lead to conflicts. So up to this point, we've talked about what anxiety is within vulnerability, how it's one of the different emotions, how when it's left unchecked, it can manifest in really unhealthy ways at the individual leadership level, but also more widely in workplace culture and the sense of psychological safety at work. And now we'll look at what we can do about it. So clearly we don't want it. Clearly we think, how do we tolerate it? How do we even get rid of it? People come to me, just want their anxiety to go away tomorrow. We all do. Sometimes that's not really possible, right? I wish there was a silver bullet, but we know that these different things work. And the first thing I want to talk about is the growth mindset. So the more accepting we become of these vulnerable areas of anxiety, of the fears that we have inside and the unhelpful thoughts that accompany them, the more it allows us to pinpoint the origin. Why do we feel this in the first place? We understand ourselves better and our responses without always attributing it to external factors. I think this is really key in breaking part of the cycle as well, which is it tends to be really easy for people to say, I can't do this and this because of external factor X as part of the workplace culture, but how much of it is driven by our own psychological baggage, right? And if we can grow from this inside and address these areas first that are within our control, that's where I believe growth for leaders can really start. And so we start with a growth mindset. And that's really how we can turn this anxiety into a strength. I'm not saying it magically transforms into something great. It's not like a pep talk we give ourselves that we say, oh, we embrace this so much. And we might not be able to reduce it completely, right? It gives us this competitive edge as well. But I would argue that reframing it and seeing it as an avenue of growth, because it gives us so much information about ourselves and how we can grow and improve, it calls on us to get in touch with the two other things that we know works, and that's empathy and courage. So the first thing to get in touch with as we grow is a sense of empathy for ourselves, what we have endured in the past that make us who we are and how we feel vulnerable or anxious, as well as others, right? This is a human universal experience. And the second thing that we can get in touch with is courage. All right, courage to make the changes, again, starting with ourselves, even if nothing else changes in the interim. And when we demonstrate this as leaders, the growth mindset, the empathy, and the courage, and we're not even talking about HR strategies at the moment as well, but that's, again, a whole other box, I think, to unpack. But this is at the individual level. When we do this, when we demonstrate these as leaders, we build an atmosphere of psychological safety that allows others to grow in their own areas of anxiety and vulnerability, right? This sense of building that culture, giving that culture of permission, if you like, thereby creating authentic connections, right? Again, that word keeps coming up, authentic, to be ourselves. And with the authentic connections comes stronger teams, because we're able to obviously communicate better and work together more effectively. Therefore, the solution lies in the last 2 points here, which is a combination of self-help and external help. And self-help will come in the form of emotional regulation techniques, right? This is something, again, we can learn and apply ourselves. When we manage to do this, we manage to really keep a calm, regulated state of mind, especially when we have to make those proactive decisions, when we have to manage conflict, right? So self-help, and the external help would come through the form of conflict management expertise, mental health expertise to help you pinpoint some of those anxieties and what you can do about it to regulate it. And this external help helps teams as well to navigate conflict and move forwards more productively, right? So I often hear as well from my clients that it's easier to work with different viewpoints than to get stuck at the level of often isolating introspection at the high leadership level, right? The C-suites, the mid-management, there's a sense of, I can't talk to anybody about this. So this is where the external help comes in, and just having this external guide to help them through their responses gives them a stronger sense of confidence and hard strategies to back their decisions up. So all in all, when we put this together, it creates this great opportunity for strong leadership to grow and emerge. And really wrapping up my presentation before we go to a Q&A and just seeing where we are with time. I think we started sort of 5 minutes late. I hope we have time to stay a few more minutes past 12:45. Some practical tips to end off with. So we know what works, what kind of solutions, but what tips can we employ just at the individual level, which is what we're focusing on today. So the first thing is to work with ourselves, again, that sense of self-reflection, view anxiety with self-compassion, right? And I think as leaders, it's really crucial to extend that sense of compassion to ourselves that sometimes we find it easier to extend to others, right? Imposter syndrome can affect everybody at all levels. But how are we talking to that? How are we talking to those voices, those unhelpful voices? And I would suggest here, speak to the anxiety as you would to a troubled or worried loved one, right? And I think you will find that the voice you use with that loved one who's going through something anxious and troubling can be so different from how we often talk to ourselves. So that's really where we start to break those cycles of unhelpful thoughts around our vulnerabilities, around our anxieties. The second thing is to reflect and gain clarity in conflict. And this is how it can help us with the other parties, with the other stakeholders, our other colleagues that we work with. And here we call on this compassion, right? We spoke about having compassion for ourselves, but when we turn it to others, we get to understand them a bit better, their emotional states. We recognize that conflict often comes because of unmet needs or misunderstandings. And the more that we can understand the other's position, the more we gain clarity in the conflict. What do people really need and want? And we can make those proactive decisions based on that. The third tip is to take care of your emotions. And here we spoke about the emotional regulation. And I'm sure there are techniques that you favor the most, whether that's mindfulness or journaling. But as leaders, it's really important to learn to regulate that. And if needed, to work with a mental health professional to really start to be able to pinpoint the roots of some of those unhelpful thoughts so that you can stop them recurring with the same strength and frequency. And the last tip I would suggest is to share learning lessons. And this is part of what we can do for others, right? And it starts with ourselves, again, leading by example, by demonstrating that you are willing to learn from setbacks, that we are able to adapt to changing circumstances. It helps to foster a growth mindset, right? It shows that we're being authentic, we're being real, that mistakes are there to learn from. And together, this is courageous and effective leadership. This is the type of leadership that is well equipped to manage conflict. And with that, we'll go to the Q&A. I'm just seeing a big thank you from Naomi to everyone. I hope it's possible to stay just a few minutes as we wrap up. But now I'd like to open it to everyone to see if there are any questions that you have. Thank you so much for listening and for your attendance.
I might have a question, but if there are others, they can go first. Aga, did you want to say something? Okay. I had a question on how to motivate to change to a growth mindset. I mean, on an individual base, I feel that most of them are open to it. But compared to the risk they're taking, how do you convince them to make a start with it?
Mhm. Yeah, great question, Danielle. Thank you for that. So the growth mindset is really, I feel, something that just comes so intrinsically from somebody. The first point would be creating that awareness. So generally, I think giving them as much information as possible about the growth mindset and why it works is key. To starting that journey, right? But I think the question then lies in also how do you unlock this at an individual level? And for that to happen, I like to really speak to emotions first before we talk about the rational, right? And the reason for this is I think when there's resistance to anything rational, anything solution driven, it's usually because there's some kind of emotional blockage. So I try and address that first. It's kind of, what's going to keep you from expanding, what's keeping you from discovering. And usually the emotions start creeping out. So once we address that and we go to the awareness creation stage, oh no, I'm seeing that I'm getting a closed breakout room, but I'm going to keep them open just as we finish this. So I was saying, as we calm them down and tell them, okay, these are the emotions that are blocking you, work through it. And then we can go to the more rational side of why a growth mindset works. One of my favorite techniques is to ask 3 questions. And it's the could I, would I, and when would I sequence. And it's a really practical tip. I see you laughing, like maybe you're familiar with it as well, but just asking people, could I accept that I am stuck?
You're on mute, Lira.
Oh, hi, everyone. Oh, no, it just kind of cut off midway. Whoops. Sorry to everyone who was on in my breakout room and it cut, unfortunately. Yeah. I'm seeing that I think everyone here was nearly everyone here was on my call. Naomi, I'm really cognizant of time as well, so I wasn't aware that it would cut at that time. Shall we wrap up quickly, or how would you like to go about this?
You can wrap up. You can take 1 or 2 minutes to wrap up if you like.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Thanks so
And
much.
everybody who needs to go can go, and then everybody who wants to stay for the wrap up can stay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah. So Danielle, just to finish that answer, but could I accept that I am in that position, but I can find a way through? Would I begin to accept that and believe that I can find a way through? And then when would I begin to accept that? And these 3 very simple questions, as simple as they are more cognitive techniques to begin to ignite the growth mindset in someone. So I hope that answers it, even though it was an excellent question with a much more nuanced answer that it deserves, I think. But as you can see, we're really sort of running out of time. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. And thank you, Danielle, for your question. Thanks, Naomi, for the extra minute that I had to close up. And yeah, I would love to hand it over to you or close up as well.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We hope that you can join throughout the rest of the week as well. But showing up for yourself, obviously, on the very first day of European Mental Health Week already is a great way to start your week. So thank you very, very much, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
See you tomorrow.